great introduction. So yes, butterflies have been part of my life, my whole life, and I work as an agricultural entomologist, and this is the time of my life now when I can actually introduce butterflies into my day work, if you like, because of what I'm going to describe to you. So, but I'm going to talk about two separate things, viticulturists and prisoners partnering in butterfly conservation and research. And so the first one is a project that I call Beauty with Benefits. It's naturescape in vineyards for biological control of pests and butterfly conservation. So, starting with Beauty with Benefits, that shot is actually Red Mountain, which is near Benton City, near the Tri-Cities, and taken about a decade ago. And now there's a vineyard in that very location. So, you know, this is beautiful shrub steppe habitat in the spring that's now being taken over by viticulture. But the opportunity now exists to link agricultural pest management with nature or wildlife conservation. And the reason for this is there's less pesticide being used. So there's less pesticide being used and more use of biological control. And so because of that, farmland can become a habitat for butterflies and flora, wildlife generally. And this has become quite a big thing in Europe in particular, and also New Zealand and Australia. So far little's been done in the US, but I'm part of what we're doing to address that balance. So the Washington State wine grape industry is #2 in the US behind California, and it's known for its quality wines, and it's rapidly growing. And we're fortunate, unlike California, to have relatively few serious pests. You can count them on one hand, the number of pests that we have. So because of that, biological control has been fairly easy to develop. And so within a decade, we've gone from a situation where quite a lot of chemicals were applied to a situation where very few are applied. So it's low input, low pesticide input, and sustainable. So we're very fortunate in having that as a feature of the Washington grape industry. But before vineyards, and as you've listened to my talks before, you know that my daughters always appear in them, and this is Jasmine quite a long time ago, looking embarrassed back then. This is again Benton City, or Red Mountain near Benton City, and where vineyards are on this mountain now, creeping up to the top. But before they were there, before agriculture in the Yakima Valley, there was shrub steppe and native flora, and they're insect visitors, and not just butterflies, but all the insects that have associations with wild plants. And butterfly populations and populations of other beneficial insects have suffered as these habitats have been destroyed or diminished to turn into vineyards and other agricultural crops that the Yakima Valley is famous for. Butterflies like these in particular, I'm just going to show a few of them, whose populations I believe have suffered during the last 3 or 4 decades, 2, 3, 4 decades in the Yakima Valley. Myletta crescent. It's even 10 years ago I could see more Myletta crescents in the valley than I do now. Sagebrush checker spot. You find it on Red Mountain right at the top, and some nearby hills, rather than mountains, but it's very localised. And a swallowtail we just heard about from Dave. It's also, Lamatian desert pastures are, being swallowed up as agriculture's being implemented in the valley. Wonderful blues, lupins. I actually know of colonies of this butterfly on Red Mountain that were there a decade ago that are not there now. And the exact spot where they were is now the vineyard. So there's no doubt that these species are suffering. Large marble is another one that's probably suffering. And Becker's White. And Coronis, perhaps, at the Yakima end of the valley. So what I'm doing in my work as a professional entomologist working on vineyard pest management is to restore native habitat. I've told you that the vineyards now are low input and fairly sustainable, and so we have the opportunity to improve biological control by by restoring native habitat. And there's a lot of grape growers that are actually doing this on their own, but they have no idea really of what plants are the best from the point of view of helping biological control. And that's one of the aspects that we're working on. To have plantings of certain plants to bring the biocontrol agents closer to the grapevines so they don't have to fly as far and therefore be more effective. And maybe to develop some ground covers as well. There are some native plants like buckwheats, for example, that could lend themselves to being ground covers, in between the rows. Instead of having dirt or just grass, you could have some native plant that flowers that would enhance biocontrol. So these are the things we're working on. And of course we're using native plants because they're hardy and climate adaptive. They do not need special attention. And the whole idea is to have something that growers don't need to irrigate specifically, something that's going to grow on its own.
What was that, David? Was that purple sage?
Yes. So these native plants are home to the natural enemies, as I've already said, but many of them also have a dual role as host plants for butterflies. So this is where my two worlds collide, if you like. I can combine the two things, enhancing biocontrol agents and also providing host plants for butterflies, some of the vulnerable butterflies that I just mentioned.
Do you know what wasp that was?
No, I couldn't tell you offhand. No. Nice wasp.
Neither do
Yes.
I.
I was wondering that, but
But we want to know which local plants are best in terms of pulling in and retaining beneficial insects. And 3 years ago, we had no idea. Now we've had 3 seasons of intensive trapping of insects around native plants. We targeted about 120 native plants. So we have a very good database of information on what specific native plants attract in terms of beneficial insects, predators and parasites. The butterflies we already know, of course, we know the host plants. If you've read Dave and I's book, we know about the host plants. So we did the evaluation by using sticky traps, clear sticky traps, not coloured, because coloured sticky traps will attract, if they're yellow or other colours you can get. Clear sticky traps around plants, and insects will get stuck to them, and then we take them back in and pull others out. For the bloom periods of the plants that we're looking at, this is that parsley that somebody mentioned, I think it was the Columbianum, which I haven't seen any swallowtail larvae on it, but I think it is recorded as a host. So 103 species with about 120 now, 2,500 traps per season. So it was a vast undertaking, up and down the Yakima Valley, different spots. It wasn't all in one location. And the things we were looking at, beneficial insects for vineyards, listed there. Those are the sort of main groups of beneficial insects that we're interested in, so that we were counting those. And just briefly show some of the data, which this is combining all the beneficial insects together. So you get a listing of plants there. And sagebrush was number 1, which surprised me, but on further thought, it probably shouldn't be a surprise since it's the dominant plant in the landscape, the shrub steppe, and been there the longest, and more insects have adapted to it probably. So that was number 1. Grey rabbit brush was number 2. Oregon sunshine. Actually, these numbers are fairly based on 1 year's data. Most of these are pretty much the same, but there's slight movement in numbers. But the things that are listed there all still appear in the top 10, 15. So you can see further down buckwheat, milkweed. I'll go through these slides fairly quickly because we need to. Oh, it's interesting there. These are the lower ones, the ones that didn't attract anything. So I don't know if they equate to what you know when you see insects looking at plants, but those ones do not attract any beneficial insects at all. Yes.
And these are all native plants that you did, or there's some?
Yeah, there's some that are not. Dandelion is stuck in there just because it's supposed to be good, attracting things in the spring. By and large, mostly it's 98% native plants. Predatory bugs, so looking at different groups, and I'll just go through these slides pretty quickly, but you see the same plants pop up again and again. So you get buckwheats. All of our group of buckwheats are all good insect attractors, beneficial insect attractors. Western clematis was one that I didn't anticipate as being good. Goldenrod I thought would be nettle. I'll talk more about that later. It's good. Beneficial flies, again, Oregon sunshine. Yarrow is one of our top performers. It's a good nectar source for butterflies. It also attracts a lot of beneficial insects too. Milkweed is always there. Buckwheats again, rabbit rush. Rabbit rush is excellent. Parasitic wasps, again, you see the buckwheats there. The native bees, milkweed is right at the top. Buckwheats are in there again. Big sagebrush, as I mentioned, it attracts the greatest number of beneficials in terms of the actual numbers, but it's limited to mostly parasitic wasps. It's full flowering, obviously, in early October. Out of those 10 groups of beneficials, only 5 of the groups were represented, mostly parasitic wasps and predatory bugs. So there's lots of beneficials, but they're all parasitic wasps or predatory bugs by and large. So it's not attracting some of the other ones that we're interested in for grape growers. Grape rush is more widespread in the types of beneficials that attract 7 groups, so that's probably better than sagebrush. And it's good for butterflies, as you're all aware. Hopefully, you know, you go out in September, you'll find all the butterflies on rabbit rush. Oregon sunshine is another good nectar source of butterflies, but also attracts lots of flies and wasps. Western clematis, snow mountain grants near Yakima. Ruddy coppers, Western clematis, snow mountain grants near Yakima. Ruddy coppers lacks lots of beneficial insects too. 9 of the 10 groups. The buckwheats, I'm going to mention these quite a bit, I think. One of my favourite buckwheats, the northern buckwheat. 9 of the 10 groups is probably one of the top 2 buckwheats. The other one's tall buckwheat, Leighton. So those 2 together. And as you all know, buckwheats are caterpillar hosts for a dozen or more species of blues, coppers and hair streaks in Washington. So they have this dual purpose, good for beneficials and essential for some of our butterflies for their development. Showy milkweed, many butterflies use as a nectar source, and of course we all know that the monarch butterfly needs it to survive and develop on. But we can now say grow milkweed not just for the monarch, but also for attracting beneficial insects, even to backyards, etc. It's going to attract a lot of parasitic wasps, a lot of predatory bugs, a lot of things that go around eating pests. So it's got multiple value, multiple purpose. Lots of beneficials. And yarrow, I mentioned that before. This one is very robust too. You can mow it and it'll come back. In some parts of the world it's considered a bit weedy, but in our eastern Washington environment it's not really weed. And this has great potential as a ground cover for vineyards. So I don't know about the top, about 20 top-ranked plants for beneficials. 12 of them are also host plants for approximately 16 butterfly species. So you can see that there's, a joint purpose there. And 18 of them are important nectar providers. So we have potential to do more than just enhance flow control. To combine vineyard habitat restoration for pest control with butterfly conservation. So as part of this research, we've also looked at some vineyards that are already restoring habitat, like this one here, compared to conventional ones, which may have grass but no flowering native plants at all. And so we monitored over a number of years, 3 years, the insect fauna and butterflies. And I'm just going to show, I think, the information on butterflies. We had 4 areas we were looking at: the Columbia Gorge, Columbia Basin, Walla Walla, Quincy, all great grain areas, but very different areas. And in each of those areas there was one habitat enhanced and one conventional vineyard. So that's where we got the data from. And the habitat enhanced vineyards tended to have 30 to 50 flowering native plant species close to the vineyard, in the vineyard, within 50 metres. Whereas in contrast the conventional plants had less than 10 close by. So it's quite a difference. So data here on the beneficial insects too. So you can see, and this is the main purpose of the work from the point of view of the funding body and the grape growers. We want to see more beneficial insects, and this is combining all the beneficial insects. You can see this is the conventional vineyard, the mean 2013, and it's significantly lower than the habitat enhanced vineyard. So these are the vineyards with the habitat. There's more beneficial insects there, but not as many as in the habitat surrounding. So we've still got a little way to go to get all of those into the vineyard perhaps, but they are doing much better than conventional vineyards in having beneficial insects in their property. And conversely, looking at the pest numbers, conventional vineyards have greater numbers of pests. We combine all the pests compared to the habitat enhanced vineyards. Both of these are habitat enhanced. So the beneficial insects are doing their biological control job. We've got data for over 3 years to show this, and so it's fairly convincing data for grape growers to actually go and do this, to actually get native habitat established on their property. So looking at the butterflies at these same places, the Columbia Gorge, in 2011 we first started looking at the butterflies, and we saw 9 species of this habitat enhanced vineyard, and here they are coming along there. Wildflowers, Mylita, peony, copper, purplish copper, somebody else is shouting out, the wood nymph, woodland skipper, silvery blue and ringlet. And it's down the gorge, so also gorge conventional vineyard just a mile away, we only had the ringlet had the oak dusky wing. That was fairly, compared to the interest in that first year. And then, so we combined the data for 3 years and for all the sites. And so you can see the habitat enhanced vineyards, the big yellow bar, far more butterflies in habitat enhanced vineyards in terms of species. So it's just numbers of species that we saw in the vineyards during our monitoring of the beneficial insects. So looking closer at Columbia Gorge and Walla Walla, you can see the same trend in those 2 viticultural locations in those, the habitat enhanced versus the conventional vineyard. About 8 to 10 species compared to 2 to 4 species in the conventional. So,
David,
yep.
Is there any resistance from the grape growers
Resistance in terms of?
in terms of putting the flowers in?
Well, it's a technology that's developing. People are becoming more and more interested. I'm getting more contact, more phone calls all the time about wanting to do it. And there's organisations, there's something called LIVE, which is low input viticulture, that they want to belong to, but to belong to it, to get premium wine, they have to have habitat restoration. So there's groups that are forcing them to do it. And so there's more and more interest. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't want to do it. It seems like too much hard work. But that's gradually turning around. So, within the next decade or so, you'll see a lot more of this happen. But there's already a hardcore of people that have been doing it for some time. So the previous slide was the species, and so just looking at the numbers of individuals, we get the same trend too. So in the habitat yards, you get, in our half-hour visit, up to 30 or 40 individuals, butterflies, compared to 5, less than 10 in the conventional. So it's pretty convincing evidence. But we did see that numbers of butterflies greater in vineyards that have been restoring habitat for at least 5 to 8 years. So obviously the longer you do it, the better it will be in terms of butterfly establishment. But in some of the vineyards we were looking at, Red Mountain and Quincy, the numbers were not so different, particularly Quincy, which was surprising. This shot is actually Quincy, I think. There's quite a lot of native plants there, but the butterflies didn't seem to be responding in the same way. But Red Mountain, they are just beginning to develop and they're showing slight signs of it working. So my story is that using plants that are both butterfly hosts and attracted to predators and parasites will maximise the conservation potential of vineyard habitat restoration. And there are, by my estimation, more than 50 species in eastern Washington that could be encouraged to occupy Washington vineyards as long as the host plants were there and nectar plants. And already we've seen half of these in the habitat enhanced vineyards we monitor. So I think there's great potential for it. But you know, one of the drawbacks with the grape industry is that if I mention butterflies, they don't like that at all. That's not. I mean, they're happy to see me do the suppression of pest insects and attraction of beneficial insects. But if I start talking butterflies, and they think I'm off on my own tangent, and they don't see the value of that quite so much. Even though I told them, I think there's great commercial enterprise potential for, marketing the fact that you're butterfly friendly and you have a butterfly on your wine label. Because people have done this in New Zealand already. You can buy wine in New Zealand that's got butterfly enhanced vineyard on it, but again, it's just a matter of time before they accept that sort of rationale, I think. But so we've seen 28 species in our 4 habitat enhanced vineyards, and there's the listing of them there. If you're interested, I'm not going to read them all. Most of them I mentioned already. They're the ones you'd expect. A lot of them are wide-ranging butterflies that aren't necessarily going to breed in a vineyard, but a lot of them are. Some of them are vulnerable and threatened. The oak dusky wing, obviously, having populations in vineyards will be, could be very important in the future. And if it works in grapes, then it can work in other crops eventually, because the trend is for reduced pesticide use in all crops, and some are more successful than others in achieving it. But given another 50 years, most crops will be almost pesticide-free, probably, or very limited. And if the pesticides they use will be less harmful to butterflies. So, in the future, agriculture could play a big role in butterfly conservation. And we only saw 9 in the 4 conventional vineyards, and these were the ones you might expect to see in a vineyard that's not very hospitable. Cabbage white, just passing through, Becker's white, orange sulphur, migratory, and swallowtail flies through probably. Brown elfin's surprised. That was down in the gorge. Grey hairstreak, also a bit surprising. Sooty wing, that's not surprising. But so it's a much smaller list. But so moving on to some of the other plants, stinging nettles. I probably don't need to. I'm preaching to the converted here, I guess. But the point, yes.
Is anybody else doing this in America? I mean, is this unique to our area?
It's unique to our area, yeah. Even in California, they're not doing it. From the point of view of butterflies, it's definitely unique. But habitat restoration is fairly unique. There's a group in Michigan that's looking at native plants, and there's a couple of groups in California perhaps, but nobody's looking at it for conservation of other insect potential. The point of this slide, I think, is the fact that we all know about the butterfly species that nettles host, but we didn't know about, like milkweed, all the beneficial insects that they also attract. So these bars here, the 3 bars, are predatory bugs, beneficial flies, and parasite wasps. So you see, in each of the 3 years, we've sampled lots of nettles. This is a big data set. They routinely attracted a lot of these 3 groups of beneficials. And I looked in the literature, and sure enough, in Europe, they've looked at, a lot of this stuff has been done in Europe, mind you. It may be unique to the US, but in Europe, they've been doing it for a while. And people have found in Europe that stinging nettles also attract predatory bugs. So there's people who've written papers on it. So it wasn't too much of a surprise once I saw that. But we didn't know that in this country. So when you're telling people to grow stinging nettles in the backyard, you can tell them it also benefits biological control of their pests as well, which is a good plus. So pest management and nature conservation will increasingly be entwined as pesticide inputs decrease and the need for species conservation increases. As I said, Europe is at the forefront of this because their land mass is so small compared to ours, and so their threatened species have got very little habitat left. So they have to have farmland that's more friendly, otherwise they're going to lose the butterflies. That was a bit of promotion at the beginning of the project. Where this is a good fruit magazine, and they actually like the idea of putting butterflies in. I don't know if the grape growers liked it, but there's a couple of websites there, a Facebook page, and just Google beauty of benefits, and you'll probably find it. Okay, so that's the first subject. I don't know if I should ask a question.
Before you leave that, is there any way you can turn this into dollars for farmers? Is there any way to relate crop yield to controlling the problem bugs, or anyway to show that they use smaller amounts of pesticides.
Yeah, and we're showing that as well. We'll be showing that they, it reduces the amount they need to apply pesticide, they need to apply, and they save money from doing it. Yeah, I mean, most of them probably realise that, but it's just the difficulty or perceived difficulty in doing it, and the time that it takes to do it that has not, got a lot of people involved yet. But there are a few that have been doing it for some time. But certainly the cost benefits are there, particularly in the long term, having not to spray for pests and pay for pesticides.
Yeah, in mentioning the beneficials, you seem to be mentioning pollinators as well as predators, is that right?
Yeah.
Flies and
I put them all in the one basket, yeah. But, all this, so I've lumped all the data together, but I mean, that's part of what I need to do is tease out all the separate things, the pollinators in particular, and we plan to do that.
So I noticed on the pictures you showed of the enriched areas, they almost all had lupin and balsam root, which looked very beautiful, but yet those species weren't on your list of.
No. Well, lupin is now on our list. In the first year, it wasn't. And there's a difference, and this is where I've had some conversations with Dave about lupins, because nobody seems to know about lupin taxonomy. Maybe Stuart does. Maybe I shouldn't ask. But, I mean, it was one species, Lepidus, I think, was not very good. But now, Wyethii, if that's what I think we have mostly, that is good. That is a good species. That's up in the top 20 now. So it depends on lupin, which lupin species you're working with. Balsam root, also, the same story. There's different balsam root species. Cariana. That's the one that's good. Sagittata's no good, and all the other ones are no good. So just one of the species, and that's actually a number of groups of flowers are like that. Lamation is another one. None of them are really good, but grey eye was better than all the others. So even though they're very similar plants, they often appear to have different attraction. Yep.
Is there any concern about the planting between rows just competing with the vines?
Yeah, and that's another part of the work that we've just started now. We've actually put some of our native plants in a vineyard at WSU Prosser within the vines, and the idea is to monitor their competition or not, and influence on agronomy. They could affect wine, for the better or for the worse. And so we need to do all that work as well, and that was part of what we're doing in the future. But it's going to come to a halt at the moment. But we need to know the answers to those things. They're not going to compete probably because, they irrigate vines with a dripper, right on the roots, right there. So that it's not, in row is completely dry, which is why the plants have got to survive no water. So it's unlikely they're going to move too far out, I think. We need to just check.
Do you know anyone you're looking at, or do you know of anyone who's looking at the benefits of planting legumes like lupine, like lupin, who are nitrogen fixers?
Yeah, there's some work being done on that. That was one.
Sorry.
Well, that was one of the early species that showed potential was yellow sweet clover, until somebody said that it was a bit of a pest species further east. But it was very good for attracting beneficials and also it fixed nitrogen, etc. And it's actually been used in the past in vineyards for that purpose, and so that's one that will be a dual purpose. But the lupins could do that too, yeah. But like anything, once you start research, there are other avenues to explore too, and you can't look at them all. Some people. Okay, so